Imagine watching a tiny seed sink into the dirt.
Okay.
And then, like, a moment later, a green shoot explodes from the soil, wraps itself onto a trellis, and just thickens into this woody vine.
Right, like time-lapse photography.
Exactly. Broad leaves unfurl in a blur. Bunches of pale green grapes swell up. They turn that deep, dusty purple and suddenly burst fermenting into rich, complex wine. And all of this happens in the span of, I don't know, about 3 seconds.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite an image.
Right. But for the 19th century Scottish writer George MacDonald, that wasn't magic. It wasn't, an illusion or some violation of the laws of physics. It was literally just God hitting the fast-forward button on a Tuesday.
Which, I mean, that completely upends the way most of us were taught to think about the miraculous.
Oh, totally.
Because we usually treat miracles as these divine interruptions. We just assume the universe is a machine, right?
Yep.
Running on this set of fixed laws.
Right, like clockwork.
Exactly. And a miracle is when God essentially reaches down, jams a wrench into the gears, stops the machine, does something completely impossible, and then, pulls the wrench out so the machine can keep running.
That is exactly how I've always pictured it. Like a cosmic magician doing a parlor trick just to prove he has the power to break his own rules.
Right. But today, we are taking a totally different approach.
We really are. So if you are a learner who loves those paradigm-shifting moments that just completely reframe your reality, you're going to want to settle in for this one.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to explore George MacDonald's 1870 classic work, Miracles of Our Lord. But because we want to give you a fully rounded perspective, we are pairing MacDonald's honestly beautiful pastoral insights with a contemporary conservative evangelical assessment of his work.
And we really need both of those sources in tandem.
Mm.
I mean, MacDonald has this pastoral imagination that is just profoundly beautiful.
It really is.
He can look at a familiar biblical narrative and just draw out these layers of the Father's heart that you might have glossed over 100 times.
Yeah.
But as the contemporary evangelical assessment rightly points out, that same freewheeling imagination requires some firm theological guardrails.
Right. You need boundaries.
Exactly. So our goal today is to navigate those waters carefully.
And we're doing it with a very specific practical focus. We're keeping this on a layman's level.
Right. No heavy seminary jargon today.
No, none of that. The point of this deep dive is to figure out how this specific view of miracles can actually deepen your Christian faith, enrich the way you read the Gospels, and practically inspire you to love and serve Christ in your normal everyday life.
Which is what it's all about.
So let's go back to that fast-forward analogy. I actually want to push back on this a little bit because, okay, if Jesus turns water into wine at Cana, he is bypassing the normal rules. I mean, how is that not breaking the laws of nature?
Well, you have to look at how MacDonald redefines what nature actually is.
Yeah.
Because in the 19th century, when MacDonald was writing, science was really solidifying this idea of absolute, unbreakable natural laws.
Right, the Industrial Revolution era.
Exactly. And many theologians panicked. They felt like they had to defend miracles as explicit violations of those laws just to prove God was still in charge.
Oh, interesting.
But MacDonald argued the exact opposite. He says a miracle isn't a violation of nature's laws. It is actually the absolute ultimate fulfillment of her deepest laws.
Okay, I'm going to need you to unpack that. How is bypassing the entire growth cycle of a grape the fulfillment of a law?
Think about what God is continuously doing in creation. God is always sustaining the world, giving life, causing growth.
Right.
That continuous, quiet background hum of creative energy, that is what we call nature. MacDonald calls miracles epitomes.
Epitomes. Okay.
Yeah, they're condensed, highly concentrated bursts of that exact same creative energy. So Jesus isn't acting against the grain of the universe at Cana. He is acting entirely with the grain. He is just doing it instantly, directly before human eyes, so that we can clearly see the living will that is always operating behind the scenes.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not a different kind of power. It's the exact same power that grows the grapes every single year in vineyards all over the world. It's just, applied at hyperspeed.
Precisely. MacDonald calls normal agricultural growth God's divine alchemy.
Divine alchemy. I like that.
Because it requires rain, soil, sunshine, time, and human labor to harvest and crush the grapes. It takes a whole year. But at Cana, Jesus simply acts as the creator in miniature.
Right.
He bypasses the vine and he bypasses the time, but he doesn't bypass the essential nature of what the Father is always doing.
And what I find so interesting is that our sources point out the specific Greek words John uses in his gospel to describe this event. John doesn't use the word for wonder or like power play.
No, he doesn't.
He uses semeion, which means a sign, and he says it revealed Jesus' doxa, meaning his glory, but it was a wedding, it was a party. This wasn't parting the Red Sea or calling down fire from heaven. It feels incredibly understated for the debut of the Son of God.
It is remarkably unostentatious, isn't it? I mean, the master of the banquet didn't even know it happened.
Yeah, he just thought the groom had saved the best wine for last.
Exactly. Only the servants and the disciples knew where it came from. MacDonald stresses this stolen or hidden character of the miracle.
Stolen.
Yeah, because it perfectly mirrors the hiddenness of the Father's work in nature. When God grows a harvest, there are new trumpets blaring.
Right, it's silent.
It happens quietly, underground, and over time. Christ manifested his glory by quietly ministering to a very ordinary human need, the need for joy and celebration at a wedding.
So if we take this framework that a miracle is just God's normal, everyday providence put on fast forward, what does that actually mean for you, the listener, on a random Tuesday?
Well, it absolutely shatters the divide between the sacred and the secular. If miracles are just concentrated bursts of God's normal care, then the ordinary, slow-moving world you live in is heavily saturated with the divine.
Wow.
It means the mundane loaf of bread sitting on your kitchen counter is just as much a direct, supernatural gift from the Father's hand as the loaves and fishes Jesus multiplied for the 5,000.
I love that. When you, cut your fingers slicing vegetables, the slow, multi-day process of your skin knitting back together and healing, that is exactly the same divine work as the instant cleansing of a leper. It's just running at normal speed.
Exactly. When you begin to realize that the same love that causes the wheat to grow once touched water and made it wine, your entire life becomes sacramental. You don't need this guy to rip open to know God is active.
Right.
The Creator is quite literally in the kitchen with you.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Because if Jesus is essentially a hyperspeed version of God, and God wants humanity to know him and believe in him, why the secrecy?
What do you mean?
If I had access to that kind of concentrated hyperspeed power, I would write my name in the stars. I'd float above the temple in Jerusalem in broad daylight. Why keep it quiet? It feels entirely counterintuitive to the mission of saving the world.
That is the pivotal distinction MacDonald draws between raw power and true glory.
Okay.
We tend to confuse the two. Raw power, omnipotence standing entirely on its own, is actually terrifying. It's a horror.
A horror?
Yeah, because power alone cannot create anything beautiful. It can only compel, crush, or demand submission. If Jesus simply wanted to show off his power to prove a point, he could have terrified everyone into bowing the knee. But he didn't use miracles to bully people into belief.
Because true divine glory isn't about flexing muscles.
Right. True divine glory, as revealed in Jesus, is self-giving love intentionally ministering to a human need. That is why Jesus consistently refused the temptation to perform spectacular stunts, like throwing himself off the temple so angels would catch him.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The miracles were always a compassionate response to a desperate need, never a theatrical stage for a performance. The glory of God is the glory of a servant.
Yeah.
MacDonald insists we have to read the miracles as transparent windows into the compassionate, tender character of the Father.
Let's dig into a specific example from the sources that perfectly illustrates this, because the mechanics of how Jesus heals are so fascinating. Let's look at the healing of the leper.
Okay, yes, great example.
The text says, this man comes to Jesus, falls on his face, and says, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Now, assuming the fast-forward theory, Jesus has the power to just speak a word from 20 feet away and cure him.
Right, he does that with other people.
Exactly. But the gospel writers include a very specific, striking detail here. Jesus reached out and touched the man before he spoke the word of healing. Why?
To understand why that matters, you really have to understand the brutal reality of leprosy in the first century.
It was basically a death sentence, right?
Yeah. More than that, this wasn't just a physical disease, it was social and religious death. A leper was ritually unclean, banished from the community, forced to live outside the camp, and required to yell unclean if anyone approached.
So humiliating.
This man was entirely starved of human contact. The healthy, warm human hand, which is naturally comforting and healing to our psychology, had not been laid on him for years, maybe decades. Everyone shrank from him in horror.
He was completely untouchable.
Utterly isolated. So Jesus is faced with a man who has two massive wounds: the physical disease rotting his body and the profound emotional trauma of isolation.
Yeah.
What does Jesus do? He prioritizes the man's emotional and relational healing over the mere physical cure.
No.
He does not say, let me clean you up first so you are sanitary and safe to touch. Out went the loving hand to the diseased skin. The touch came first. He met the man squarely inside his defilement.
That completely upends the religious establishment of the time. I mean, the religious rule was that if you touch the unclean, you become unclean yourself.
Yeah.
But Jesus touches the unclean, and the unclean becomes clean. The purity flows outward.
And MacDonald argues that this physical touch was the ultimate revelation of the innermost heart of God. God respects the human body and the human soul, even in its most corrupted state.
Think about the practical application of this for a Christian listening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever moral or spiritual leprosy you feel like you are carrying, the addictions you can't kick, the deep-seated pride, the shame you hide from your family, we have this default religious setting that tells us we need to scrub ourselves clean before we can approach God.
Oh, constantly.
We think we have to get our act together before we are worthy of his presence.
But the leper shows us that God's touch precedes our total restoration. He doesn't stand at a distance, shouting instructions on how to sanitize your life.
Yep.
He reaches directly into the isolation of your spiritual corruption to cleanse you from within. Understanding that mechanic, that God's love moves toward the mess, not away from it, should free a believer from that exhausting, legalistic treadmill of trying to make yourself perfectly presentable. It inspires a much deeper, more authentic love for Christ.
Okay, but I want to pull in a loose thread here.
So-
If God is so deeply compassionate, and if his glory is found in ministering to our brokenness, why the brokenness in the first place?
The big question.
Yeah,
Yes.
why does the leper exist? Why is there disease, fever, and death if God is a loving father who just wants to heal us?
It is the oldest and most unavoidable question in theology, the problem of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And MacDonald's view here is nuanced. First, he makes it absolutely clear that physical evil, suffering, disease, decay, pain is entirely against God's ideal order for creation.
Okay.
God does not delight in pain. Death and disease are intruders. However, we live in a fallen world, a world fractured by human rebellion. And in this fallen world, MacDonald argues that God employs physical evil as a pedagogical tool. He uses it as a severe mercy.
Severe mercy, I like that phrasing. It implies that the pain isn't punitive, like a judge hitting you with a gavel, but corrective, like a surgeon using a scalpel. It hurts, but it's designed to cut out something worse.
That's a great analogy. MacDonald asserts that suffering is utilized to cure moral evil.
Moral evil.
Yes, moral evil.
Yeah.
Our pride, our self-sufficiency, our alienation from God and each other is the true disease of humanity. Physical pain is often the only thing loud enough to shatter our illusion of self-sufficiency. It drives us to the end of our own resources and leads people to recognize their ultimate desperate need for their Creator.
So MacDonald is essentially saying that if God just waved a wand and eliminated all sickness and pain, but left our selfish, proud hearts untouched, he would actually be condemning us.
Yes, to destroy the physical symptom, the suffering, without curing the underlying disease, our alienation from God, would be to ruin humanity completely.
Wow.
We would just become perfectly comfortable in our rebellion. Pain, as brutal as it is, often acts as the shepherd's crook that pulls us back to the source of life.
And we actually see this dynamic play out in the specific healing narratives. The miracles aren't just about making people comfortable again. They always demand a response.
Always.
Take the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. The sources note that the gospel writers use the Greek word pyretos for her fever. It describes a chaotic, burning heat, an unnatural intrusion invading her body and rendering her helpless. But the very second Jesus rebukes the fever and she is healed, what does she do?
The text says she immediately arose and served them. The Greek verb used is diakonio, which means to minister or serve.
Right.
She didn't ask for a cup of tea. She didn't say, I need a few days of bed rest to regain my strength. The healing instantly translated into service.
And it's not just her. Look at the woman in the synagogue who is bent over for 18 years. The text uses Athenia for her weakness and Apollio for her release from the spiritual bondage causing it. But Jesus doesn't physically manipulate her spine. He speaks the word, but she has to actively lift herself up. Or the man with the withered hand in the synagogue. Jesus doesn't just magically inflate the hand while the man sits there passively. He gives a command, stretch out your hand.
Which, medically speaking, was the one thing the man absolutely could not do. His hand was paralyzed.
Exactly.
But in the attempt to obey the impossible command, the healing power was supplied. The healing required his active participation. MacDonald makes it incredibly clear. Healing and salvation are never, ever given for passive privilege. The joy of health is labor. He who is restored must instantly become a fellow worker with God.
When you apply that to the listener today, it completely shifts the paradigm of what it means to be saved or healed.
It really does.
When you experience restoration, whether that is recovering from a terrible illness, finding emotional healing after years of trauma, or experiencing the profound spiritual deliverance of salvation, it is not a VIP ticket to sit in the stands and watch everyone else work.
It is a draft notice into the kingdom of God. Whatever restoration the Lord has graciously granted you is simultaneously an invitation and a command to join the Father's work.
Yeah.
MacDonald says that in serving others, you actually enter into the very life of the Son who came not to be served, but to serve. Your healed trauma becomes the exact tool you use to comfort someone else. Your deliverance from addiction becomes the roadmap you use to guide someone else to freedom.
That really changes the focus of our prayers, doesn't it?
Right.
If we understand this, we aren't just praying to feel better or to have easier lives. We are praying to be made useful again.
Absolutely.
And speaking of prayer, this leads us into a fascinating aspect of the sources. When you read through these miracles, you realize Jesus never used a standardized, one-size-fits-all approach. He didn't have a formula.
No, not at all.
He constantly, meticulously adapted his method to the specific spiritual condition of the individual in front of him.
Which, again, MacDonald points out, is a beautiful reflection of the Father's heart. The divine treatment of humanity is the treatment of a father dealing with his unique children. Every single man and woman who came to Jesus received a cure uniquely tailored to their specific personality, their cultural background, and their level of faith.
Let's break down a few examples because the contrasts are stunning. Let's start with the woman with the issue of blood.
Okay, yes.
She has been bleeding for 12 years. She is ritually unclean, ostracized, broke from paying useless doctors, and completely desperate. She doesn't even have the courage to ask Jesus for healing to his face. She tries to basically steal a cure by sneaking through the massive crowd, crawling on the ground, and just touching the hem of his garment. She is terrified and deeply ashamed.
And practically speaking, her plan worked. Power went out from him, and her body was instantly healed.
Right.
Jesus could have easily let her slip away into the crowd. She had what she came for, but he stops everything. He turns around in this crushing mob, and he demands to know who touched him. He draws her out into the open.
Which initially sounds kind of cruel. Why embarrass this poor, terrified woman in front of everyone?
Because he had to establish a relationship. If he had let her walk away, she would have lived the rest of her life thinking that divine power resided in a magical piece of cloth.
Oh, like a talisman or something.
Exactly. She would have retained her superstitious view of God. Jesus couldn't let her settle for half a gift. He wanted to give her the physical healing, yes, but he also needed to give her the far greater gift, the personal knowledge of his love.
And the way he speaks to her is so incredibly tender. The sources highlight that he calls her daughter.
Yes, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. It is the only time in the recorded Gospels that Jesus uses this specific, intimate term of endearment for a woman.
Wait, really? The only time?
The only time. He didn't scold her for her ignorant, superstitious approach. He met her exactly where she was, inside her shame and fear, commended the tiny seed of faith she had, and elevated her to the status of a beloved child.
Now contrast that gentle, tender approach with how Jesus handles the Syrophoenician woman.
Oh, this is a huge contrast.
This is a story that makes modern readers incredibly uncomfortable. She comes to him, begging for her demon-possessed daughter to be healed. She is a Gentile, a Canaanite. And Jesus seemingly ignores her, then rebuffs her, and finally drops this incredibly harsh metaphor saying, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." On the surface, it looks like a xenophobic insult.
It is a genuinely shocking moment in the text.
Yeah.
But MacDonald, with his pastoral intuition, interprets this completely differently. He argues this is not an insult at all. Jesus, knowing the profound depth and brilliance of this woman's faith, is intentionally sparring with her. He is goading her spirit into utterance.
Like pushing her to see what she's made of.
Exactly. He is giving her an obstacle so she can show everyone how high she can jump.
He's challenging her intellect and her faith simultaneously, and she absolutely rises to the occasion. She doesn't get offended. She doesn't walk away. She catches his wit, uses his own metaphor, and throws it right back at him. "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs."
Exactly. And Jesus delights in it. He essentially says, "Brilliant answer. Because of this reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter."
I love that.
He recognized her sharp mind and her fierce maternal love, and he adapted his approach to draw that out of her. He met the bleeding woman with tender comfort, but he met the Syrophoenician woman with intellectual rigor.
And then you have the Roman centurion. This guy is a military commander. He understands hierarchy, authority, and chain of command. He tells Jesus, "You don't even need to come to my house to heal my servant. I am a man under authority, and I have soldiers under me. I say, go, and he goes. I say, do this, and he does it. Just say the word from right here, and I know my servant will be healed."
And Jesus marvels at this man. He literally turns to the crowd and says, he hasn't found faith like this in all of Israel.
Which is saying something.
It is, because the centurion understood Jesus' cosmic authority through his own daily military paradigm. Jesus didn't demand that the centurion learn Jewish theology. Jesus met the man right inside his own understanding of command and obedience.
Which brings up a massive point for the listener regarding the practice of intercessory prayer. Both the centurion and the royal official in John chapter 4 came to Jesus not for themselves, but asking for miracles on behalf of others, a paralyzed servant, a dying son. And Jesus grants the miracle from a distance based entirely on the faith of the advocate.
This should radically revitalize how you view intercessory prayer. We often treat praying for others as just sending good vibes or merely wishing them well.
Yeah, like sending thoughts and prayers.
Exactly. But MacDonald suggests it is profoundly more mechanical than that. Intercessory prayer is an actual spiritual conduit. When you pray for your fellow man, the spiritual connection between us and God is so tight, so interconnected, that the blessing you beg for actually flows through you to the end of the prayer. You become a redistributor of divine grace.
You literally take your friend, your spouse, your sick child, and you drag them into the presence of the Father with you. It's not just a nice thought. It is active participation in their spiritual and physical reality.
It is the highest exercise of our shared humanity. We are not isolated, individual atoms bouncing around. We are a deeply connected body. And when one member passionately advocates for another before the Father, it aligns perfectly with the mediating intercessory love of Christ himself, who constantly intercedes for us.
Okay, this is all incredibly inspiring. MacDonald's pastoral insights are beautiful, but this is the exact moment where we need to pivot because we promised a balanced look.
Yes, we did.
The sources we are using include a very rigorous, conservative, evangelical assessment of MacDonald's book, and frankly, this assessment raises some serious theological red flags about how MacDonald reaches his conclusions. How do you navigate that? Do we just take the good and ignore the rest?
It's a crucial pivot, and we have to handle this carefully. To be clear, we are not taking sides here, but we are going to impartially report on the boundaries and the theological guardrails that this conservative evangelical source provides. The assessment is actually highly appreciative of MacDonald, but it warns that if you follow his underlying theology to its logical conclusion, you might end up outside the bounds of historic orthodoxy.
Let's start with where the evangelical source agrees with MacDonald. What are the positives?
The primary positive is that MacDonald fiercely defends the miracles as real, historical, objective events.
Okay.
In the 19th century, many liberal theologians were trying to demythologize the Bible, claiming the miracles were just subjective symbols or moral fables. MacDonald flatly rejects that. He affirms they were real acts that objectively happened in history, revealing God's compassion and cohering perfectly with the gospel narratives. Furthermore, the assessment praises his ability to comfort sufferers, noting that his insights into Christ's tenderness are practically unmatched.
So he gets the history right and he gets the compassion right. Where does he go off the rails, according to the evangelical critique?
The first caution is methodological. The source notes that MacDonald relies heavily on something called imaginative reconstruction.
Give me an example of that. What does imaginative reconstruction mean in this context?
It means MacDonald uses his literary genius to guess the internal, unspoken motives of biblical characters and even the internal psychology of Jesus and Mary, rather than sticking strictly to what the text actually says. He fills in the blank spaces of the Bible with his imagination.
So it's almost like he's writing high-quality historical fan fiction in the margins of the text.
That's a blunt way to put it, but
Yeah.
yes.
Right.
While that can be incredibly illuminating and devotionally warm, the evangelical assessment firmly warns that imagination cannot be the tool that establishes the authoritative meaning of a biblical text. The original author's specific wording, the immediate historical context, and the canonical connections to the rest of Scripture must govern interpretation, not a Victorian writer's romantic imagination.
Okay, I can see the danger there. If you rely on imagination, the Bible just becomes a mirror for whatever you already want to believe.
Exactly.
But the source points out a much deeper systemic theological issue with MacDonald, doesn't it? It has to do with how he views the cross.
Yes. This is the core of the evangelical critique.
Yeah.
The assessment points out that MacDonald's broader theological framework strongly leans toward universal salvation, the belief that eventually every single human being, and perhaps even fallen angels, will be reconciled to God and saved.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because of this, MacDonald holds to what theologians call a moral influence view of the atonement.
Let's break that down for the listener who isn't in seminary. What exactly is the moral influence view, and why does a conservative evangelical take issue with it?
The moral influence view argues that the primary or even sole purpose of Christ's life and death was to demonstrate the breathtaking extent of God's love. By seeing Jesus suffer and die for us, our cold, rebellious human hearts are melted, softened, and moved to repentance. The entire focus is on changing us, reconciling humanity to God.
I mean, that sounds entirely biblical. We are moved by God's love, and we do need to be reconciled to Him.
It is absolutely part of the truth, but the conservative evangelical critique is that it is only half the truth, and a half-truth presented as the whole truth becomes a dangerous error. MacDonald focuses almost exclusively on the restorative, healing, fatherly nature of God's love. But in doing so, he downplays or even outright denies other massive biblical realities.
What realities is he ignoring?
He displaces the biblical categories of objective legal guilt, the reality of divine wrath against sin, and the absolute necessity of Christ's penal substitutionary death on the cross.
Okay, unpack that a little bit.
In traditional evangelical theology, the cross wasn't just a tragic demonstration of love to soften our hearts. It was a cosmic legal transaction. Christ objectively dealt with the penalty of sin and absorbed the righteous condemnation of God by taking our place as a substitute.
So MacDonald emphasizes the hospital aspect of salvation, God healing our sickness, but he minimizes the courtroom aspect of salvation, God legally pardoning our guilt because the penalty was paid.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. The assessment notes that texts like Romans 3, detailing justification by faith, or Galatians 3, which talks about Christ becoming a curse for us, simply cannot be reduced merely to moral influence. Furthermore, MacDonald's leaning toward universal salvation directly conflicts with the clear conservative evangelical reading of final eternal judgment found in texts like Matthew 25 or Revelation 20.
So, practically speaking, if you are a Christian listener who holds to a traditional biblical view of the cross, how does the evangelical source suggest you read MacDonald? We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because his insights into the compassion of Jesus are frankly incredible.
Right, you definitely don't want to discard it. The source provides a very clear, practical roadmap. It offers 4 evangelical controls or lenses to keep firmly in place while you read them.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, read each miracle strictly in its gospel context.
Right.
Don't lift it out to make a philosophical point. Ask why Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John specifically included it in their narrative structure.
Okay, got it. Second,
affirm the miracle's historical, supernatural character. Do not just view it as a vague, universal religious principle of God's general benevolence. It was an actual, concrete, historical event tied directly to the person of Jesus of Nazareth.
makes sense.
Third, always connect the miracle to Christ's specific messianic identity and the arrival of his kingdom. The miracles aren't just random acts of kindness. They are the promised signs that the king has arrived and the kingdom of God is breaking into the present evil age.
And the fourth, which seems to address the main critique about the cross.
Right. Fourth, you must read the physical healings and the temporal restorations in the miracles as appetizers, as anticipations of the final, eternal redemption of the cosmos that was secured specifically and exclusively through the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
So a healed leper isn't just evidence that God is nice and won't judge anyone in the end. A healed leper is a preview of the physical and spiritual resurrection bought by the blood of the Lamb.
Exactly. The assessment concludes with a great summary. MacDonald is a brilliant spiritual provocateur and an unmatched reader of Christ's pastoral compassion. But he is not a safe, systematic theological guide when his romantic imagination outruns the doctrinal boundaries of historic evangelical orthodoxy.
Right, you have to read with discernment.
You read him devotionally to inflame your love for Christ, but you let the whole counsel of Scripture define your theology.
That is an incredibly helpful, balanced way to approach the text. And speaking of that final redemption and the ultimate resurrection, that organically brings us to the climax of the miracles.
Yes, it does.
Because all of these healings, the fevers, the blindness, the withered hands, they are amazing, but they are temporary.
Yeah?
The leper who was cleansed eventually got old and died. Peter's mother-in-law eventually passed away. If death has the final say, then all these healings are just a brief pause in an ultimate tragedy.
Which is why the temporal miracles must point toward the ultimate miracle. The absolute defeat of death itself, conquering the final enemy.
The sources look at 3 specific escalating instances where Jesus raised the dead. First, you have Jairus' daughter, a young girl who had just died moments before Jesus arrived.
Right.
Then you have the widow of Nain's son, a young man who was already dead and being carried out on a funeral bier. And finally, you have the most dramatic example, his close friend Lazarus, who had been dead and buried in a tomb for 4 days.
And the story of Lazarus provides one of the most fascinating psychological insights into Jesus in the entire New Testament.
Oh, absolutely.
When Jesus receives word that Lazarus is sick, he intentionally delays his journey. He knows exactly what he is going to do. He knows he is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Yet, when he finally arrives at Bethany, and he sees Mary weeping, and he sees the crowds mourning, the text in John 11 gives us a visceral reaction. It says, Jesus groaned in his spirit, was deeply troubled, and he wept.
This has always baffled me. If you know you have the power to fix the problem in exactly 5 minutes, why are you crying? I mean, if I'm about to surprise my friend by paying off his massive debt, I'm not crying with him. I'm excited to show him the check. Why the profound grief?
MacDonald's interpretation of this is profound. He suggests Jesus wasn't just grieving the temporary loss of his friend. He was feeling the crushing, invading weight of the general misery of humanity's lack of faith.
Oh, wow.
Jesus, looking at the weeping crowds, felt the oppressive, suffocating darkness of human despair, the agonizing grief that comes from believing that death is the absolute end of the story.
So he wasn't weeping because Lazarus was dead. He was weeping because we were so broken by death.
Yes. To God, death is merely a sleep. It is a temporary transition. But to human beings, wrapped in our unfaithfulness, our fear, and our limited perspective, death looks like a monstrous annihilation.
Yeah.
Jesus wept over the profound pain that our spiritual blindness causes us. He empathized completely with the agony of a world that lives in the fear of death.
He felt the weight of a world with a broken heart.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then he acts. He tells them to roll away the stone despite the stench of a 4-day-old corpse. And he cries out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth."
Chills.
MacDonald points out that he is not just doing a favor for a friend. He is demonstrating that the Son does only what he sees the Father doing. He is enacting on a micro scale the Father's ultimate grand will for the entire human race, which is the total destruction of death.
Which ties perfectly into an event we don't always categorize as a miracle, the Transfiguration.
Right.
Usually when we think of miracles, we think of Jesus doing something to someone else. But the sources include the Transfiguration here, where Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up on the mountain, and his appearance is completely altered.
It is included because it is the ultimate revelation of the glorified human form. It shows us the destination of all this healing. And MacDonald points out a brilliant, subtle detail here regarding the mechanics of what actually happened.
Okay, what is it?
When we picture the Transfiguration in our minds or see it in classic paintings, we usually imagine a bright light from heaven shining down on Jesus, illuminating him like a spotlight on a stage.
Right, like God the Father is shining a flashlight on him from the clouds to say, "Look at my son."
But MacDonald argues that is entirely backwards. The light wasn't shining on him from the outside. It was breaking out from within him.
Whoa. Wait.
Yeah, the Greek word used by the gospel writers is metamorphathy, from which we get metamorphosis. It implies an inward, essential change manifesting outwardly.
Okay.
MacDonald argues that this was the natural spiritual light of a perfect, completely sinless human soul in absolute, unbroken communion with the Father, finally breaking through the heavy physical veil of his earthly body.
So it wasn't that he put on a divine disguise for a minute.
Oh.
It was that he momentarily took off his earthly disguise. We finally saw what was always burning underneath.
Exactly. It was a momentary outbreak of the same life-giving, uncreated light that would later, in the resurrection, render his human body perfectly immortal, glorious, and obedient to the Spirit.
That is incredible.
The Transfiguration is a sneak preview. It shows us what humanity was originally intended to be in the Garden of Eden and what redeemed humanity will one day become in the new creation.
So let's land the plane here. If I'm a Christian listener, navigating a world filled with illness, aging, loss, and the looming reality of death, what does this ultimate miracle mean for me today?
It means that these miracles are the ironclad guarantee of your future. They are not just ancient, dusty stories of what Jesus did for a few lucky peasants in the first century.
Right.
They are the down payment, the earnest money, on the promise that every believer will one day possess a glorified, resurrected body, completely free from disease, decay, anxiety, and death. And even more beautifully, MacDonald argues that these resurrections secure a very specific, deeply comforting hope, the hope of mutual recognition in heaven.
That we will actually know and recognize our loved ones again. We won't just be floating, nameless spirits. We will be us.
Yes. Just as the widow of Nain received her specific son back alive, and just as Mary and Martha received their specific brother Lazarus back, the bodily resurrection promises that our human relationships, redeemed, purified, and perfected, will continue into eternity. Death does not have the final say over human love.
Wow.
The grave is not a black hole. It is a door.
That is an incredibly profound, hopeful place to anchor our faith. Let's take a deep breath and recap this journey we've been on, because we have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by completely reframing how we view the miraculous. We realized that miracles are not magic tricks breaking the rules of physics, but rather the Father's continuous, natural, everyday care put on fast forward.
We saw that Christ's glory is fundamentally different from the terror of raw power. His glory is defined by self-giving love and deep compassion, prioritizing the relational and emotional needs of the outcast, as we saw when he intentionally touched the leper before healing him.
We tackled the incredibly hard truth that suffering, while absolutely not God's ideal, is utilized in a fallen world as a severe mercy, a pedagogical tool to awaken us from our moral rebellion.
Right.
And we saw that every healing, every restoration we experience is actually a draft notice calling us into active service for the kingdom.
We explored the beautiful intimacy of faith, seeing how Jesus masterfully tailored his response to the individual. He met the timid touch of the bleeding woman with tender comfort, and he met the bold logic of the centurion inside his military paradigm.
Yeah.
And we saw how intercessory prayer invites us to actively partner with God in bringing those we love into his healing presence.
We navigated the theological guardrails, understanding how to deeply appreciate MacDonald's pastoral genius and his insight into the Father's heart, while filtering it through a robust, conservative, evangelical commitment to the historical, objective, and substitutionary work of Christ on the cross.
And finally, we looked at the ultimate triumph over the final enemy, finding the resurrection of Lazarus and the stunning light of the transfiguration, the absolute unbreakable guarantee of our own future glory and eternal reunion.
It is a massive, beautiful, breathtaking picture of a God who is intimately, passionately involved in the microscopic details of your life, which brings me right back to where we started. We talked about miracles being like time-lapse photography God, hitting fast forward on the slow, meticulous, beautiful work he is already doing in the soil, the rain, and the vines.
The divine alchemy of the everyday.
Exactly. So I want to leave you, the listener, with this final provocative thought to mull over today as you go back to your normal routine. If every miracle of Jesus is simply a concentrated hyperspeed version of what God the Father is always doing in the background, what slow miracles is God actively working in the darkest, most frustrating, most mundane corners of your life right now? What if you aren't abandoned? What if you are just completely blind to the miracle simply because it hasn't finished blooming yet?
It changes how you look at the waiting, doesn't it? It changes how you look at everything.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope this has challenged you, encouraged you, and deepened your faith. Until next time, keep learning, keep looking for those slow miracles in your life, and we will see you on the next one.